This is my October reading wrap, and I've got a confession. I read a couple of these books in November. This October, I read a stack of new releases and a stack of Victorian classics. So I'm going to discuss the recent releases from Celest, Ling, Candice Carty-Williams, Barbara Kingsolver, Diana Reid, Ling May, Craig Silvey, Rebecca Kwong, Elizabeth McCracken, Moshin Hamid, Jessica Andrews, and Kamila Shamsie. Not to mention all of the books I read for Victober. And I've really enjoyed alternating between some very, very new books and some classics. I love the variety of era and the different styles. I just feel so much more refreshed after each novel. I have this terrible habit of just getting consumed in one type of literature and not reading a variety. Lately, I've been reading just a lot of newer books, but prior to that, I read nothing but classics for 2 to 3 years. So clearly I love both. Once I get through the outrageous number of books I have out from the library at the moment, I'm going to have to come up with some sort of plan to have a balanced variety between the two. Before I get into the books, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Recently, I lost about 40 subs in a 36-hour period, which is 3.5% of my total subs. And I don't know why this happened. I don't think I've had 40 people genuinely say, "Nah, I'm not into this channel anymore." Especially as I've seen 2 big clumps of about 15 subs disappear while I was in YouTube Studio replying to comments. So I think there's something funny going on, but losing 40 subs, it's more than a bit demoralizing. I even considered walking away from YouTube entirely for a few hours, but honestly, that's just not an option. There are just too many great people in this community, other content creators, just subscribers, commenters, and authors who just make my day so much better. But I want to just take this chance to ask you, could you please check to see if you've been unsubscribed by YouTube? And if you regularly watch this channel, could you please make sure that you are subscribed? It would honestly mean quite a lot if a few of you subbed to undo whatever weirdness has caused this dip. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on that. Let's get on with the books. As always, I'm saving the best until last and beginning with the DNFs. This month, I finished 21 books and I didn't finish 10 of them, pretty close to 1 in 3. Now, to the left are some stats for people who like that stuff. I'm not going to read them aloud. You can just pause the video if it's too quick for you. The up and down of it all is that I have a lot of books to talk about, so I'm going to review them quickly. DNFs. And we're going to start with Lanny by Max Porter. Max Porter is a very talented author, but he has a weird bombastic style which I don't really like, but can often push past on account of him just being a good writer. So really the fault with this DNF, I'd have to say, is mine, because why on earth did I start a Max Porter novel when I wasn't really in the mood for his very particular and challenging writing style? The Rabbit Hutch, Tess Guntley. This was an early DNF. I did not like the writing. There was nothing straight away that hooked me, and it just felt really forced. 2 people who had just met, they were having a conversation about religion, and I was kind of like, if you want to talk about philosophy or religion or whatever, I don't mind, but please go to the effort of making this feel like a natural conversation. This just started to scream Kafkaesque, which I know a lot of people will love, but that's not my thing. I really, really don't like books that are just about ideas. Once I've read about an idea, I've read about the idea. And it was interesting the first time, but not the second time. And speaking of ideas-based literature that I didn't get along with, Pure Colour by Sheila Heti. I'm not going to say that this is a bad book, but it was very, very clearly not a Scott book, which is more than I can say about the next novel. I love you, but I've chosen darkness. Claire Van Watkins. I mean, to be fair to this book, I think the trashiness, the badness of it, I think that's a feature. You know those movies that are so bad, they sort of transcend bad and they actually end up as kind of good, especially if you're under the influence of laughing gas and or red cordial. Side note, is getting high off red cordial a distinctly Australian thing? Or do children, teens and irresponsible adults of other nations partake in such sugary silliness? Anyway, the highlight of this novel is that a woman's vagina grew teeth. And that's funny. But it would have been significantly funnier if I had have consumed a bottle and a half of red cordial prior to it. While red cordial definitely could have saved this book, nothing could save Self-Portrait with Nothing by Aimee Pokwatka. By Aimee Pokwatka. By Aimee Pokwatka. By Aimee Pokwatka. No. Because this was really slow, repetitive, pointless, and boring. The premise is good. An adopted girl finds out that her mother is a painter and there's something supernatural going on. I wonder what it is, if only it wasn't foreshadowed at least 73 times. There are many universes, and each of those universes represents all the different possibilities. Imagine me in another universe, except this time I have blue hair, or a pig as a pet. And in one of those universes, I really enjoyed this novel. Probably because I had my brain removed and replaced with red cordial. I couldn't tell you if this was meant to be speculative genre fiction or literary fiction, and normally I really like that. You know, literary yays and genre woohoos. Nobody dislikes that. But this novel, I got literary nays and genre boohoos. Yeah, I'm not above a terrible pun on this channel. Boring, predictable, and it treated me like an idiot, which, to be fair, I kind of see where the author was coming from. Speaking of not being too sure whether the author is writing literary or genre, I DNF'd Ling Mei's Bliss Montage. I know that's a bit of a shock. Ling Mei wrote Severance, and Severance is really good. It's literary fiction meets zombie apocalypse. Read Severance instead of Bliss Montage. That's a cool book. Bliss Montage is a very weird collection of interconnected short stories. And look, I like weird. But weird needs a payoff. Otherwise, you're just talking about zero-gravity clowns drinking red cordial, contemplating have an orgy, for no reason at all other than the author hopes that the reader will think that has something to do with the various clowns' relationships with their mothers. Just to clarify, that didn't actually happen in Bliss Montage. This book instead has 100 ex-boyfriends living in the same house as their ex-girlfriends. And there's a narrative around domestic violence, which kind of gets lost to the weird dreamscape nature of the interconnective short stories. And we're going into the Victorian novels I read for Victober now, or rather that I didn't read because I gave up on them. Sybil or the Two Nations by Benjamin Disraeli. I suspect that this may have been a bad book going into it, but I thought I would enjoy learning about the people and the politics of the time, and hence it wouldn't matter. And who knows, I might be surprised. It might have been a good book. However, I recommend going to Wikipedia and looking up Chartism there instead. This was slow, boring, and with bad character work. And worst of all, it didn't say anything that wasn't easily looked up on Wikipedia. But to be fair to Disraeli, he probably didn't have access to Wikipedia in 1845. Shirley, Charlotte Bronte. I have to say I was in a really changeable and capricious mood this month, and this novel and the next novel really suffered from just a general lack of patience on my behalf. However, was I missing something here? This book is called Shirley. Shouldn't there be a character in it by the name of Shirley? Maybe there's a property called Shirley or something? I don't know. But I feel like this book lacked a focal point. My least favourite part of each book is the beginning. I like to have some idea of what I'm reading about. I want the author to put me at ease early on. I like an author to start simple and then build complexity. For example, I like reading about a young girl who is bullied by her auntie and cousins. It doesn't matter if the book doesn't stay there and later she becomes a governess and falls in love with a truly horrible man. I just need that focal point. I kind of start each book in a default state of confusion, and I have a very variable level of patience. And unfortunately, Shirley caught me at quite a low level. As too did The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. I was just frustrated by this book being way too slow-paced for me. Again, that's a mood thing. I really needed to have more patience when I was reading this book, but I just wasn't in the mood for it when I picked it up. And my last DNF is probably the most shocking of the whole lot here. Demon Copperhead, Barbara Kingsolver. I think that this was a really appropriate pick for what I was reading this month. A new release that is a retelling of the Victorian classic David Copperfield. Barbara Kingsolver has been very faithful to the plot, but completely changed the settings to this 1980s hillbilly, poor, drug-addled southern USA setting. To begin with, I was quite taken by this. I was having fun matching the characters and the scenes. Ooh, that's Peggotty. Ooh, that's Betsy Trotwood. That ridiculous man is about to eat all of his lamb chops. I also enjoyed the complete 180 twist from the Victorian setting and the sensibilities to include drugs and cornfields. But plot-wise, there really isn't much changed at all. And once I got used to the mashup, there wasn't a lot extra in it. I know the story of David Copperfield already, and once the novelty wore off, it was predictable. I think, in all honesty, this would be a much better novel if you've not read David Copperfield yet. Unless maybe you're a Dickens superfan, in which case, knock yourself out, you'll love this. But for me, the retelling didn't add enough. Honestly, I would have preferred to have reread the Dickens than to have read this. It was way too similar, and Dickens did it better. But I want to add, take this with a grain of salt. This is my second Barbara Kingsolver novel, and it's my second DNF of hers. And she is very well beloved here on BookTube and by people not on BookTube. Maybe there is a compatibility issue between me and her writing. I also didn't finish this, so maybe she plays around with the ending and I DNF'd it too early. That's a risk I take every time I DNF, to be honest. DNFs are over. Let's talk about the 2-star novels. And we're going to discuss Dinosaurs by Lydia Millet. A completely forgettable novel about a man who walks from New York to Arizona. And he starts to hang out with a new set of neighbours. This book really failed with its character building. It built nice relationships, but it failed to make me invest in anybody or even tell the characters apart. At least they weren't stereotyped, but they were completely featureless. This was really forgettable. If I could describe this book in one word, it would be meh. Our Missing Hearts, Celesting. I am so disappointed in this one. Celesting is a talented writer who is so much better than this. I just cannot reconcile this. Ing falls into the textbook dystopian trap of caring more about her world building and the political structures than her characters, which really boggles my mind because she can write characters. This is a dystopian America which feels a little bit like China under the Great Leap Forward. We follow 12-year-old Bird who lives with his father after his mother has left. And his mother has left because she has written something which has upset the people in power. Bird is quite naturally wondering about his mother and is feeling abandoned while coming to terms with the society in which he lives. I can't help but to comment on the author note at the end where Ing says that a lot of the things that she had imagined in this novel came true between her writing about it and the book getting published. Which, firstly, that's terrifying. What a terrible world we live in at the moment. And secondly, I think that contributed to this general feeling that the novel lacked imagination. Celesting has enough credit in the bank from the amazing novel that is Little Fires Everywhere that she can try something new and fail, but I hope she moves away from the dystopian genre for her next book. Mr. Verdant Green, Adventures of an Oxford Freshman, Cuthbert Bede. This silly novel by Cuthbert Bede was fun, but ultimately unfulfilling. It was kind of like a Weight Watchers dessert. I could see what they were trying to do, but it lacked imagination. It was predictable and not that funny. It didn't have a sugary kick. Verdant Green goes to Oxford as a freshman. It was better than nothing, but marginally. Verdant Green goes to Oxford as a freshman, and he's a bit naive. And people take him for a fool, and well, that's fair. The humour is pretty low grade. I don't mean fart jokes, I just mean it's inoffensive and ignorable. This novel was intended to be sold at train stations for people who needed something to read on their journey, and that is exactly what it feels like. Silly, but meh. A Group of Noble Dames, Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy is one of the greatest authors ever to have lived. But this is a pretty good example of why an author should be judged by their best work and not their worst. Do you know what this collection of short stories feels like? It feels like Hardy, whenever he was planning a novel, but then said, nah, I don't really like this idea, he'd start to rub his fingers together and gleefully chuckle. Another short story for a group of noble Danes. A rather forgettable collection of short stories. If you're looking at Hardy and wondering if you should read this, just reread Tess or Jude, or try Two in a Tower or The Trumpet Major if you want something more obscure. I vouch for all 4 of those books as good books. Although Two in a Tower, it's excellent, but its ending, wow. If I Survive You, Jonathan Escoffery. This is a story about race and family. A Jamaican-American man is trying to claw his way out of homelessness, and we witness why his family makes that harder, and how he has sold out his value in order to not be completely eaten by the society in which he lives. I quite like the discussion about race and fitting in that was earlier in this novel, especially as our character is a lighter-skinned Jamaican and often gravitates towards South American or Latin groups of people. He isn't sure if he is black, and essentially he's told by everybody, whatever they are, he's not that. However, there just wasn't quite enough to this novel. I needed more emotions from the characters, and there was plenty of emotional content for Escoffery to write that. Actually, I think I just needed a bit more of everything, and it's kind of a shame because this is a young author who really isn't that far away from having an excellent book, but it just fell narrowly short in almost every aspect, which sounds like a really horrible thing to say, but I will definitely try his sophomore novel. He doesn't need to grow by a lot to be an exciting young author to watch out for. And now we're on to the 3-star reads. The hero of this book, Elizabeth McCracken. This is not an autobiography. It's not a memoir or autofiction, as our protagonist, an author in their 50s, is at pains to point out. It's about her and her relationship with her recently deceased mother. Coincidentally, McCracken's mother passed away on the 26th of November 2018. But this is not a memoir. It is a portrait of a relationship between mother and daughter, a daughter's view of her mother. The daughter takes a trip to London, her mother's favourite city, 10 months after her mother's death. We also look at the sale of her home in New England and her various illnesses and stubbornness. Both the characters, mother and daughter, are interesting and likeable without having any characteristics that pops out and dominates. It's kind of beautiful, but it's also kind of flat and forgettable. I enjoyed this book, but I won't remember it. Even now, reviewing it 2 weeks after I finished it, I'm struggling with the details. Read it if you already own it, but I wouldn't rush out and buy this one. The Last White Man, Moshim Hamid. This is a novel where a white man wakes up black. I think that's a really interesting way of discussing race and skin colour and what it means. I just think that Hamid has taken that idea and didn't know where to go with it. I was wondering how people would treat our protagonist differently, knowing that he was born white, but seeing him visually as black, as opposed to hearing him visually or seeing him audibly. That's a weird statement, Scott. There was a little bit of that discussion of how people are treated differently based on their past, but there really wasn't enough. And I didn't feel like I had an understanding of the levers of racism from this novel. I feel like the discussion was really lacking. It was almost like Hamid was asking you, the reader, to consider the idea, and that was it. There was no more. Hamid is ultimately using this novel as a vehicle to say that judging people on their skin colour is wrong, stupid, bad, whatever you want to call it. And if you don't agree with that, well, you probably already know you're racist, and you probably know that you're not interested in reading this novel. But I think I would have liked just a bit more, just some subtlety or anything, really. The Netherworld, George Gissing. George Gissing is one of my favourite Victorian authors. I absolutely loved The Odd Women and New Grub Street. But unfortunately, this novel just falls short of those two. I often find this is the case with classic authors, that their more famous works are more famous for a reason. I also find that the variety in my enjoyment of classic authors, it varies much more than that of modern authors. Maybe there's something to that, I'm not really sure. The Netherworld is an early work by Gissing, so maybe it took a few books for him to develop a style in which I gelled with. That's not to say that The Netherworld is a bad book, it certainly is not, but if you're considering trying Gissing for next Victober, New Grub Street and The Old Women are just much better options. Although if you're considering trying Gissing for next Victober, please don't wait 12 months for a readathon, please just read a good Victorian novel. The Netherworld has a real blend of Dickens with Zola, which I don't think is a terrible way of describing Gissing in general. We are talking about the slums of London. We're talking about drink and drunkenness and addiction, orphans, long-lost relatives, get-rich-quick schemes, death, wills, marriage with a considerable age gap, security, people going missing for years and years only to turn back up when it's important. It's like Dickens wrote the plot and Zola wrote the themes. And Dickens also wrote the themes, because I think that this novel is a little bit too big, not in length but in scope. While The Odd Women is really about a certain class of women and New Grub Street is really about struggling artists, you wouldn't expect to see the characters from either one of those books turn up in the other, but it wouldn't have been a big shock to see those characters turn up in the Netherworld. This is just a little bit too ambitious. It is too big, and I struggled to hold all the pieces in my head. Best of Friends, Kamila Shamsie. The trouble with reviewing these books from least to most favourite is that you get to hear this a lot. This book wasn't as good as this other book by this author who I really like. I feel like all I've done is recommend books that I haven't actually read this month. And Best of Friends is fine. Actually, it's good. But it is a long way short of Shamsie's last novel, Homefire, which is a fantastic book. I highly recommend. It won the Women's Prize in 2018, and it deserved it. This novel has two storylines and is about two best friends, who in the earlier timeline are teenage girls living in Pakistan coming of age, and in the later timeline are 40-something businesswomen living in London. It is quite an odd friendship. One is rich and is going places because she is rich. The other is smart and she's going places because she's working hard. They have different values, and Shamsie said that a conversation with her sister was the inspiration for this book, in which her sister said, the friends you make as an adult, they're friends because you have something in common. Maybe you both read books. While the friends you make as children are your friends because they've always been your friends. There are a couple of real key events in the early lives of these two women which shape their futures. Their interaction with some boys, unexpected changes of government, and this allows Shamsie to introduce themes and ideas around the rights of women in Pakistan, also class divide and asylum seekers later in the novel. But ultimately, the major theme of this is friendship, and Shamsie's exploration of that is just a little too simple. I really enjoyed that one of the women had an adopted daughter, which helped her continue her career without the difficulties of childbirth, and that this daughter is black or mixed race, but whatever she isn't Pakistani, and there is an uneasiness in the extended family. And I just think we have so much here. Racism, and how racism is different towards the black community and the Pakistani community, and from within those two communities towards each other. We also have adoption, we have legacy, we have careers and glass ceilings. There's obvious feminism and mother-daughter relationships in here. And I would have loved this novel to explore this a bit more. I would have loved the book to be centered upon this idea. This is a hypothetical book that I would love to read about. Kamila Shamsie, if you're watching this on the very rare chance, please consider that for your next book. This book has a few intermittent high points, which remind you of Shamsie's Women's Prize winning talent. But it also has patches where it's a little bit slow and doesn't quite do enough, where the pacing could have been sped up, or additional ideas explored and added to the novel. And we're on to the 3.5-star books. Yeah, I'm embracing the half stars, by the way. It just helps me. README.txt, Chelsea Manning. Chelsea Manning is a former US soldier who leaked a whole bunch of documents to WikiLeaks about the war in Afghanistan. She was arrested and put on trial, and during all of this, she was coming to terms with her trans identity within an army that was still practicing don't ask, don't tell. And this is her memoir. And that is an interesting life. One of the things I love about Manning is that she started out wanting people to understand that the war wasn't black and white. It wasn't goodies versus baddies. There was more complexity to there. She wanted to communicate that there was more nuance than was being communicated in the media, so that everybody could be treated with a little bit more humanity, which is a fantastic cause. But during this process, she became an activist for trans people in custody, and she made a notable difference to the lives of trans Americans in custody. I also think it's great that Manning feels safe enough to write a book like this. May it make her a lot of money and give her financial security. She has definitely been through a lot. However, if you have been following Manning in the news, I don't really think this book is going to add a whole lot. There are a few things of interest about army life, life inside prison, and her family life and childhood, but Manning's style is stripped back and accessible. She's gone for a very simplistic story. She's gone for something easy to market to the masses. There is not a lot other than surface level things about figuring out she is trans, which could be good because we do have two big issues here, and Manning could choose which discussion was more important to her. But the thing is, with the military side of things, she has made it very clear that she has to be careful about what she writes. This book does everything a good memoir should. Manning's writing is accessible, which I think is ideal for non-fiction. Her story is interesting, it's important. Her point of view isn't a polarized left-wing/right-wing, good-bad position. It manages to be very compassionate to the troops and the difficulties they face, while still being critical of the organisation. And it's actually very gently critical, considering this is an organisation that she maintains tortured her. This is a good book. I just wanted it to go deeper. I want to die, but I want to eat topoki. See he bake. I've actually already discussed this in a video I uploaded about a fortnight ago. A successful young social media manager called Bake See He is seeing a psychiatrist for, depressed? Do I have to go into details? This is a transcript of Bake See He's own psychiatrist sessions, and she expands on each section with a short essay. It really sort of captures this growing discontent for the world in which we experience what we are sold as a good life, and whether we actually like the vision. Yet, somehow, despite this depressing outlook, we can always find the urge to eat our favourite street food. This is a sort of self-help book, come memoir, come I see you and your experience is real type of book. Nothing But Blue Skies, Kathleen MacMahon. This one was on the Women's Prize longlist last year, and it's one of the few books longlisted that I wanted to read that I never got around to. Well, that is until now. It tells the story of David, whose wife, Marie Rose, dies suddenly, and he's alone and he's reflecting on his time with his wife. And not just his time with his wife, but his identity now that his identity is stripped of his wife. It is like really grief-riddled and sad. And I think it's quite talented of Kathleen MacMahon to write David, a man who I personally did not like at all, and I don't think many people will. Yet she still managed to make me have compassion for him, to make me feel sad for him, to make me see his angelic wife through his eyes. And it was weirdly David's view of Marie Rose's view of him that made him so easy to bear, which is kind of how other characters in this novel felt, or, well, felt through David's eyes. Kathleen MacMahon is a writer I'll be reading more from. However, I did not like how this novel wrapped up. It really was on track to be a 5-star read. Until then, not a fan of the ending. And now, we begin with the 4-star reads. Runt by Craig Silvey. All of a sudden, from nowhere, Craig Silvey had a new novel at the library. And well, yes, of course I will. A man who usually writes emotional novels about equality, or rather inequality. And his books do have a sense of humour, although I would never call them comedies. And well, Runt, it's not like his other works at all. It really wasn't what I was expecting based on his name. But I really did enjoy this novel. A silly, fun and heartwarming middle grade novel about a young girl, Annie, and her dog, Runt, in the outback Australian town of Ups and Downs during the middle of a drought. Her father is close to losing his farm, and Annie would like to pay off the overdraft on the overdraft to help him out. So she enters Runt into a dog agility contest. The only problem is that Runt is people shy. If she can just get him to perform, maybe the prize money will be enough to save the farm. This is full of stereotyped characters. Annie's mum can't cook. She believes that parsnips and prunes are an acceptable pie flavour. Annie's brother has his own YouTube channel for performing stunts, of which Annie is the only viewer, although she is sly enough to create a new account with a different pseudonym every week or so, just so he doesn't guess. And there are several very evil characters, including Fergus Fink, Annie's rival dog trainer, a man who prefers cats. Scandalous. Silvey packs quite a few nice themes into this novel, but ultimately, this is fun. This is a middle grade romp, which was certainly not the book I was expecting, but I just enjoyed this. This was great. All the Women in My Brain and Other Concerns. Betty Gilpin. Betty Gilpin is probably best known for her role on Glow, but that really plays a small part in this memoir, which is really about how to make it in Hollywood and how Hollywood will exploit the young women trying to make it. It really blends Gilpin's bizarre, comedic, imaginary sense of humour, which is hilarious and worth reading the novel for on its own, with tales such as how when she was asked to take off her clothes for a scene, she told the director to stick her job, walked out and partied with her feminist grandmother, then woke up from her daydream, realised she was still standing in front of the director and promptly took her clothes off. She has bills to pay. Gilpin is trying very hard to be funny, and she is very successful at that. And I definitely think, if in doubt, throw in the joke.
Hey, why did the cyclist fall off their bike?
I don't know, but is it really appropriate to tell a joke in the middle of my review?
Well, we have to say it now. We've done the setup. The audience wants to know the answer.
I think they just appreciate us getting on with the review. Gilpin's use of frequent humour is hilarious in a bizarre way. The images she draws up is second to none, but it often distracts from what she is saying. And I don't know what I think about this, because it's bad writing, but it's still very entertaining. Hence, it's good writing.
Can we just...
No. Gilpin also discusses how she would just become the woman she thought she needed to be. Often the opposite of the woman the people who were hiring her thought that she was, wearing whatever mask she needed at the time. And ultimately, that's kind of what this memoir feels like. Betty, are you the funny girl? Are you the mistreated girl? Are you the girl who everybody thinks is a slut, so you might actually get naked to make some money? I don't know. Gilpin is showing us who she wants us to see, which is actually really sad when you think about it. Because she's doing it because I don't think she knows who she is.
But
Yet it's still quite captivating. We have a nice, struggling artist becoming successful. Gilpin is quite easy to barrack for and to like. The memoir is very feminist. And really, it's a shock that the media has gone gaga over Jeanette McCurdy's memoir and not Betty Gilpin's. This is rough around the edges, weird and unconventional. But it is very good and does exactly what it promises.
Can I now?
Okay, I give up. Why did the cyclists fall off their bike?
Because somebody threw a hand grenade at them.
Wow. Seeing Other People, Diana Reid.
I have a review out of this novel by Diana Reid. It is a very messy literary romance novel. Sisters Charlie and Eleanor end up in a love triangle square shaped thing. I don't know. Charlie is having a casual thing with her flatmate Helen, but Helen and Eleanor develop a crush upon each other. Meanwhile, Eleanor has just broken up with her long-term boyfriend Mark after Mark confessed to sleeping with a stripper. But now he says he didn't, and Eleanor didn't give him a chance to explain. And it turns out that Mark and Charlie have had a secret platonic friendship behind Eleanor's back. The whole novel is wrapped up in the post-lockdown bliss, as well as discussing this sort of idea, but what have I done with the last 2 years of my life? It is also clearly very bisexual. And while it is never discussed, I think the 4 characters in this love-shaped thing have very different sexualities, and that is such a cool comparison. Diana Reid is a big deal in Australia, and her novel Love and Virtue is recently out in Europe and North America, and I really recommend that novel. It is the stronger of the two. Reid is clearly very talented. There is nothing at all wrong with this book. It is very good by any author's standards, and I recommend this novel. But I was expecting more from her. Seeing Other People is 4 stars good, not the 5-star great which Love and Virtue is. And now we go on to the 4.5-star books. Yellowface, Rebecca Kwong. I have a full review out on this already as well, but I want to publicly correct a rather stupid error I made. I referred to the author as Rachel Kwong for the entirety of the review. Her name is Rebecca Kwong, which is so silly, because I was really paranoid about getting her last name wrong. At high school, I had a PE teacher called Mr. Kwong, spelt Quong, and I just wanted to check. So I looked up a video of her saying her name, including her first name. I never actually twigged that I got her name wrong. This is a wonderful little novel about 2 young women who are friends and authors. Athena, who is successful, and June, who is struggling. They go out together and back to Athena's place and get drunk. And Athena ends up choking on a pancake and dying in front of June. No foul play or anything, but June ends up leaving with a manuscript for Athena's next book. And it's really good, but Athena is Asian and June is white, and this is about Chinese labour camps in World War I and the racism the workers received. I think this sounds like it could be a really basic plot, but Kwong has really thought about it and has used plagiarism as a tool to explore racism, cancel culture, and what it is like to be an artist. I wasn't a fan of the Poppy Wars. That book didn't work for me, and I haven't read any of Kwong's other books, but this is a really, really thought-provoking and great portrait of somebody who is not inherently bad, but who is doing bad things. It's worth noting that I read an arc of Yellowface, and it's not out until sometime next year. Mary Barton, Elizabeth Gaskell. Yet another book I've already done a review on. Elizabeth Gaskell is an author who my opinion of has really improved the last few books of hers I have read. I read North and South last Victober, or maybe the Victober before, I don't know. And now I've read Mary Barton, and I think they're both fantastic novels. Mary Barton is slightly more simplistic than North and South, but it's still very similar. We've got this plot point about workers going hungry in a recession and literally dying of starvation. We also have class aspirations and a love story. I think this is a really, really good quality novel. Gaskell has really stepped up to be even with George Gissing as my 3rd favourite Victorian author. No prizes for guessing 1 and 2 on my list. I have a review of this novel out, so I will link that in the description along with the reviews for all the other books I have already discussed. People Person, Candice Carty-Williams. This is Candice Carty-Williams' 2nd novel after Queenie, which is a fantastic novel, and so is this, and if I'm honest, I think People Person is slightly better. Dimple Pennington wants to make it big online as an influencer. She has just broken up with her boyfriend and announced it to all of her followers, much to the surprise of her toxic a-hole boyfriend, who is furious. When he comes over to confront her and maybe have makeup sex, things take a dark twist, and Dimple calls her half-sibling, who in turn contacts her other 3 half-siblings, to solve the problem. But Dimple doesn't really know any of her half-siblings. She wasn't really raised with them. They're not really closely connected family. And most of them don't know each other, and they're all from different tracks of life. We really do get to see a good sample of different people. This novel is suspenseful. I was captivated until the end, and Carty-Williams manages to discuss ideas around blood or family, around obligation and pressure, race and distrust of the police, feminism and domestic violence, incarceration, friendship, being used by other people, drop-beat fathers, and there's even a lesbian couple having matrimonial difficulties. Let's call this what this is. This is a good writer using good characters to write about interesting themes with an engaging plot. What is not to love about this one? A very good book, which I find hard to see anybody who enjoys this sort of novel not enjoying. The only thing that is really lacking is it just didn't have that X factor to elevate it into 5 stars. Honor, Thriti Umrigar. Indian American journalist Smita has been assigned to report on something in the one place she never wants to visit, India. Umrigar really places the seed in your head early on. Why does somebody raised in India not want to go back? It is a big country after all. Smita has to report on Meena, a Hindu woman attacked by members of her own village. In fact, even her own family, because she married a Muslim man. And as Smita investigates, we learn more about her past and about Meena and what danger she is still in. There is a culture of bureaucracy and bribery that this novel attacks for not just allowing this type of violence, but for encouraging it. This all sounds like a textbook, emotional book that is socially critical. And I know quite a few of you will be looking at this and you'll be saying, I'm sure it's not a bad book, but Reese Witherspoon's book club. Surely it's going to be a bit basic, isn't it? And that's just snobbery. It's not the case at all. This is just a really good book. I really liked how Smita, the journalist, was wound into Meena's life and the responsibility that is placed in her hands while she is still trying to ethically complete her job as a journalist and not interfere. And I think that that bureaucratic structure is in many ways similar to the police being paid off by the communities. I think that that is a wonderful comparison that Umrigar has included in the novel. And there are a number of truly horrifying scenes. One where Smita is asking the police officer why they can't do something to help Meena, to protect Meena. And the police officer asks her, what do you want us to do? Arrest everybody? Somebody says her brother did it. Some people said her brother did it. Other people say her brother was with them when the violence happens. We cannot prove anything. This is a really, really good book. 5 stars. If an Egyptian cannot speak English, nor Naga. Again, standalone review of this novel. This was a real grower for me. I think when I finished reading it, I was thinking 4 stars. Then I started to write a review for it, and I had to start again a few times. Just the more I considered this book, the more I understood, and the better this novel became, the more different layers I got. It is the story of an Egyptian American woman moving to Cairo and a poor Egyptian man she falls in love with, and the problematic nature of that relationship. It does something very unusual in the final part, and I discussed that and why I think that is very important and helped me get a lot out of the novel in my review, and I really encourage you to watch that. Milk Teeth, Jessica Andrews. Jessica Andrews is such a special and talented author. I don't really want to think about this yet. I don't want to rank books against this novel yet, but this novel is very much a contender for my book of the year. It definitely requires consideration. Of the over 200 books I've read so far this year, this novel is one of the few novels that really stands out. And it is just the story of a 28-year-old woman and the man she falls in love with and follows to Barcelona. We constantly flash back to her childhood, which provides contrast and comparison to the modern storyline. Andrews is able to detail some really big themes, such as our connections to our bodies, eating disorders, what is love, what is connection, self-esteem, what even am I? What I think separates Andrews from other writers is her ability to write one thing and completely mean it and communicate it, but to have that communicate 3 or 4 other things simultaneously, and then to do that with every sentence. And from the wonderful channel Andrew's Book Chatter said that Jessica Andrews has the ability to see inside of my soul, which is just such a wonderful compliment. I wanted to include it here. I am never sure if I am selling this book hard enough, if I am putting it out there for the right people to read. So I'm going to specifically mention other booktubers. If you're not sure, maybe you know you have similar tastes to them. But specifically, if you are watching this, Olivia, Sean, Gemma, Bob, Sadie, Lindy, Roz, and of course Nell, you'll all like this book. And if I haven't mentioned you in that list, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't love it too. But I'm just happier to recommend this to some readers who I feel more confident with where our tastes cross over. This is a very emotional novel. In places it is really sad, but it is also quite happy and hopeful in other places. And there is nothing here that is too triggering. This is not one of those, Scott, did you forget to mention the trigger warning for the death of multiple babies situation? I think people who like sad books will get their fix from this. But people who want to like sad books but can't deal with all of the sad, they'll enjoy it too. If you would like to watch my full review of this video, just click here. If you're not subscribed to this channel, please do so now. It would be really nice to get a few of those 40 subs I lost back. As always, let me know any thoughts you had on any of these books in the comments. Bye bye.